All right, I'm going to call to order the council workshop for Monday, April 15th at 7 o'clock. Council, there's been an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none, will somebody please move adoption of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Beck, second by Councillor Hanson. Call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. We are assembled tonight for one item, which is the 2024 property taxation distribution of the property tax levy. And this is going to be Mr. Danwick's report. So we'll be ready.
Thank you, Mayor Little, and good evening, Council and members of the public listening in. Tonight, after setting the property tax levy through the budget process and receiving the revised assessment roll from BC Assessment, Council will provide direction on the distribution of the tax levy among the property classes. Council has asked staff to look into options to support business within our legislative limits in the past. And while new tools are available, we're not seeing any obvious options at this time. The province has provided tax relief to business this year, and the district's tax rates do remain generally competitive within the region. Option 2 in the presentation does provide some relief to light industry, and staff can bring up a model to simulate other options if desired. As there are likely a number of significant changes coming to our ratepayers over the next few years, staff are sharing additional information relevant to each property class tonight for Council's consideration. The upcoming economic development strategy will also provide more opportunities to support business when it's introduced later in May, and finance will be refreshing the property tax strategy later this fall. With that, I'll pass it over to Elio Iorio, our Manager of Financial Services, who will walk us through tonight's presentation.
Say that name 3 times.
Good evening, Council, and welcome to the 2024 Property Tax Distribution Workshop. Tonight, along with Rick Danwick and myself, we have Daniel Soul, Section Manager Revenue and Taxation with us. The objective this evening is to obtain Council direction on the tax levy distribution that staff utilizes in the setting of tax rates for the 2024 tax rates bylaw. This workshop tonight, we will review the tax strategy and history, issues and opportunities that can affect rate setting, and lastly, review 2 options for the tax distribution. In distributing the tax levy, the district has followed a tax competitiveness strategy designed to align its tax rates to the average within the region to maintain and sustain a competitive tax environment. The last 5 years, all tax rates have been set close or below the regional averages. This includes a non-capped Class 4 industrial tax rate of $12.93 in 2023 that remains competitive, well below the regional average. This lower rate was the result of a period of time where the new investments generated within Class 4 were reinvested back into the class to reduce the tax rate prior to market valuations increasing. Lastly, shifting of the tax requirement may be considered where the tax base of a class is small and unable to generate sufficient investment to keep its assessment base healthy. The relative share of the tax requirement allocated to the residential and commercial classes over a 5-year period has been relatively stable. Trade industry has generally maintained its share through market-based increases, averaging about 5% per year for the last 5 years. The industrial class has been relatively steady while maintaining a lower tax rate. Business class new improvements have trended lower as new mixed-use developments are created in the district. The slight decrease is attributed to shifts in assessment valuation from the business to residential class. Lastly, the residential class has slightly increased as new construction and creation of more density in the district has returned more than $500 million in new improvements per year on average since 2020. In applying a fair and equitable distribution of the tax levy, there are specific issues that affect individual property classes that need to be considered. Impacts due to cost increases for the completion of the North Shore wastewater treatment plant will put greater pressure on residential taxpayers' ability to pay, as substantially higher utility fees are passed through by Metro Vancouver. To assist in softening this increased burden, we look to advocate to the province of BC on behalf of district residents to extend the province's property tax deferment program to allow the deferment of utility fees. The new provincial housing legislation will change how BC Assessment calculates property valuations with respect to the creation of small-scale multi-unit housing. This new type of build has the potential to shift a greater proportion of taxes payable onto single-family homeowners, creating new pressures not experienced before. And understanding how to use permissive tax exemptions to utilize and incentivize new affordable housing projects, we will have to review BC Assessment's treatment of legal covenants and property valuation to ensure proper support for housing projects is targeted in the best means possible. These are some of the issues affecting the residential class. Staff will need to review impacts and propose potential solutions, which will be brought back to council for direction later this fall. A sample property tax and utility fee notice for an average residential class property assessed just under $1.7 million, provided for reference of 2024 taxes payable. Municipal taxes based upon a 7% tax increase rise by $180 from prior year. The municipal portion attributed to the utility charges increases by $44 for a total increase of $224 for municipal controlled charges. The Metro Vancouver portion of the utility fee increases by $88, while school and other agency property taxes combined rise at an estimated $110. In total, an average residential class property will assume an estimated $422 increase for a total tax and utility payable of $6,825. Within the light industrial and business class, current assessment practices impact fairness and taxation. Bill 28, enacted by the province in late 2022, provides changes to the community charter that apply a permissive tax exemption tool to provide tax relief to small businesses or nonprofits affected by a greater than average increase in taxes when operating in areas undergoing higher use property development. The legislation enables the creation of a new lower business class tax rate that can be applied against land valuation that is determined to be impacted by development potential. Staff have reviewed multi-year business class assessments for properties located in the major town centers and have noted that greater than average increases in valuation did occur in the initial stages when the OCP and its various implementation plans were first approved. Increases in taxes experienced by businesses located in the town centers between the years 2011 to 2017 have now moderated closer to the class average. Staff will continue to monitor on a yearly basis should the tool be required if new areas in the district undergo higher use development. Higher uncertainty for business operations is more pronounced today since the Bank of Canada instituted a more aggressive monetary policy. with a current policy rate of 5%, making it more expensive for businesses to leverage financing. The province this year has introduced supports to business and alleviating some increased costs. BC budget measures introduced in February are estimated to save $3,325 for a small business generated through BC employer health tax exemption increases and one-time electricity savings credits for commercial and industrial hydro customers. The province providing structured support will come in the current economic environment, but ongoing advocacy for the better application of provincial school taxes by reducing the tax rate. School taxes paid by businesses in the Lower Mainland are generally higher than other regions in the province. In the month of May, the Economic Development Office will introduce the district's economic development strategy, which will provide a suite of policy and operational initiatives and actions aimed at supporting local business. The property tax strategy will require a review later this year to ensure tax policy is updated and incorporate any new directions and support the business community. This slide, a sample property tax bill for a median business class property. That's just $1.5 million is provided for reference of 2024 taxes payable. Municipal taxes increased by $458 from prior year. School taxes and estimated other agency taxes increased by $58 total, for a total taxes payable of $13,645. Businesses receiving provincial support with reduced employer health tax premiums and electricity affordability credits approximately amounted to $3,325 for a small business may be able to utilize these savings towards payment of their property taxes payable. Impacts of the Ports Property Tax Act, enacted back in 2004, continue to contribute to divisiveness within the major industrial class and impacts fairness in taxation. Land value disparity is apparent with capped land valuation set by regulation at $350,000 per acre. While an acre of land set through market valuation provided by BC Assessment is approaching $4.2 million an acre. This disparity presents financial risk to the district as non-capped operators appeal their assessment valuations. Moving forward, the district is actively engaged in the Municipal Finance Reform Initiative, which looks to dialogue with the province to explore a longer-term solution to return equity and fairness to this class. An assessment of how district tax rates compare to other municipalities in the region will be shared as part of this review. In assessing the considerations and impacts affecting taxes payable amongst the property classes, an even distribution of the levy is recommended at this time. The even distribution option applies to tax levy increase evenly over all available property classes, except those capped by provincial legislation. This even distribution option is recommended as it maintains the total share of taxes for each tax class. It achieves the specifics of the property tax strategy for the tax classes with the greater share of the tax requirement, ensuring that their tax rates are competitive as they are below the regional averages. As light industry and the recreational class are slightly above the regional averages, pausing to review the tax strategy in support of the new economic development strategy may be an opportunity prior to shifting distributions to lower the tax rates to regional averages for the light and recreational classes. For our tax competitive strategy, option 2 considers a tax requirement shift from the class 5 light industry to class 1 residential to align the light industrial rate closer to the regional average. This option entails a small increase of $2 in municipal taxes payable by an average residential home. It reduces the light industrial rate, bringing it slightly closer to the regional average of $5.10. As the province is providing support to businesses this tax year, a shift in the property tax levy displayed in this option may not be required and could be reviewed as part of the tax strategy refresh to be provided later this fall. Staff recommend that property tax increase even distribution be endorsed. Staff bring forward a 2024 tax rate bylaw reflecting this option. Furthermore, the property tax strategy will be reviewed and brought back to council for further direction this fall.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Council, with council workshops, we typically will have public input at the end of the meeting as the primary focus to make sure that we've heard from the council. But because at the end of this meeting, we're going to be making the recommendation that's going to be going back for public debate, I think it probably makes more sense in this case to have any public input we may have at the front end to help inform our deliberations and help us make a recommendation. And so at this time, then I'm going to ask if anybody from the members of the public would like to make a 3-minute presentation on the tax distribution workshop. Yes, you may, but I'm going to need you to be nice and loud, and that's the microphone for the room. So even if you want to stand up and get as close to that as you reasonably can, that's what's going to go out.
There, yeah.
Yeah, come and sit.
Right in the CAO's seat.
Yeah, you can be the CEO tonight if you want.
I don't think I want that job. I know the difficulties through the years that you guys have.
I can verify that you don't.
So Jamie O'Connell, I think you've probably seen me a few times, financial manager at Allied Shipbuilders. Like the district, we would like to see progress on our assessment appeals and the Port Property Tax Act inequities this year, so that a full review can be done. We would caution that the fall may be a bit optimistic given how slow both of those items have progressed to date, including our appeals. So just a bit of caution on that. When looking at the competitive rates and comparing against the regional average, it is important to note the rate really depends on the relative assessed values. So the district of North Vancouver is higher in general. So if you compare it, for instance, to Port Moody, yes, of course, you look like you're doing quite well. One of the things that we do is we kind of look at where we have competitors. So in Richmond, the residential rate is very similar. It's 1.63 versus 1.56. This is last year's rate, I guess. Whereas major industry, we're at 12.93, they're at 5.90. So that's one of our competitive areas. And also Victoria, which has a residential rate of 2.81, their major industry and light industry is the same, actually at 10.7. So we actually kind of look at not the region per se, but where we actually have our competitors, which, but in general, it is important to note that it really depends on the relative assessed values. So when you look at the review that you do later in the year, just be aware of that it's District of North Vancouver is more expensive in terms of assessed values. It is important to note, as we've kind of stated over and over again, that major industry makes up only 1.2% of assessed values, but we contribute almost 10% of the district's taxation revenue. So we continue to maintain that this funding is far above what we consider our fair share, especially given our level of service that we require, which I would say is on the low end, given that we have our own security, we have our own garbage collection, et cetera. One thing that we look at as well is what is it on a per capita basis? So I know that the district is around $941 for municipal taxes per resident. Whereas for Allied, last year we paid about $465,000 in municipal taxes alone. This year, it is a 7% increase. So we're gonna see around $500,000 in municipal taxes alone. So for us, on a per employee basis, it's over $5,000 per employee. So that's a lot of money that we have to basically recoup. And it's recouped by basically charging higher rates. So whilst we're okay with the district's even distribution recommendation, we do think that all governments in general have to start taking a little closer look at spending in the future to see how, because overspending, we're seeing overspending really impacting inflation. So we have 7% increase in municipal. Our sewage went up 12.5% this year. We have the carbon tax impacts. The employer health tax was something that we say there's some savings, but for us, we already were paying that in terms of MSP, we were paying to our unions, whereas now we're paying it directly. That was a 2% basically impact to us that we then had to charge on. So those are all things. Spending is one that we would like to see the municipality look at further, along with all of government, really. Because I know last year you looked at it, but from an outside perspective, it seemed like there might have been some cherry picking in terms of taking projects that would elicit some strong response from the public to say, please do not take this artificial turf away. We would like to see further reviews, really, not just on where your tax rates are, but really where you are in terms of spending and how that can be maintained or reduced possible, because that is something that we do as a company.
Good.
Thank you, Jim.
Well said, Jim.
Thank you. But thanks for all your effort, Julio. I mean, we really appreciate the presentation material, and it's very clear, so appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Elio.
Next speaker I have is Corey Koss, joining us virtually, but I think he's just coming over the meeting to the panel, so maybe just 10, 20 seconds here.
Good evening, Your Worship.
Good evening, Corey Koss. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the workshop.
Okay, I'm just going to try and very quickly give you the point of view of taxes from a homeowner that's lived in the same home for 50 years. So it's hard to convey this and condense it down, but here it goes. In 1975, the consumer price index relative to 1.3 today was 0.245. So the consumer price index over the years has gone up by a factor of 5.4. Put that number away somewhere. And then I looked at my taxes. My taxes was $653.78 in 1975. And currently, or last year, they were $7,029.78, which is an increase in the factor of 10.7. So taxes have been increasing roughly twice as fast as the consumer price index. That's one sort of bottom line. However, let's look at what's happened to the price of my current home compared to 1975. In 1975, the home was worth, in 1975 dollars, $49,603. In 2023, it was worth about 2.1 million, which is an increase in the factor of 43. Or adjusted for inflation, a factor of 8. Okay, I know a lot of people are not number people, but this means that the homeowner really, if he's lived there for 50 years, is getting a fairly good deal tax-wise compared to the property value appreciation over that period of time. So if you've got all those numbers dotted down, I think they might be useful to for you to understand how taxes are impacting the long-term owners that have lived here relative to the short-term owners that have lived here. And that's all I have to give my input on sort of the state of taxation as far as homeowner is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Corey Cost. Any other members of the public like to contribute to the workshop? Okay, so moving on to council. Council, any clarifying questions or comments on the different options that have been presented or something different?
Bearing down on this capped property, part of Property Tax Act and the capped heavy industry. And I just want to clarify, again, they're the only tax group that aren't facing a tax increase. Everyone else pays 7% extra, but the capped heavy industry, if I understand correctly, will pay the same this year as they did last year.
Councillor Hanson.
Just speak up a little bit. We've got the fans.
For your worship, Councillor Hanson is correct. The capped portion of class 4 is capped and they are taxed at $27.50 and $22.50 for new improvements.
And the assessments are fixed.
The assessments are prescribed by the province.
And they're not, are they going up in practice or are they not?
They are set through legislation to increase at 1 plus CPI on a yearly basis.
You know, great. I just want it to be clear for everybody at the table and responding to Jamie's comments that all of us do respond to, that is the circumstance that for us to have industry as a whole paying what we consider to be their fair share, we have to have the non-capped subsidized capped, and that's what creates this, as Jamie illustrated, quite stark tax rate for the non-cap. So where are we at having that? What seems to me rather basic inequity of taxation remedy by the provincial government.
I've got Mr. Stewart has some additional comments, and since he's been running point on PPTA, we'll go to Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, your worship, I just want to agree with Councillor Hanson's point and Allied's point. I mean, the biggest issue right now in our tax distribution is really about the capped and the uncapped and the unfairness in that, and that's fundamentally associated with the value that's associated to the properties. We've made this very clear to the province. We're hopeful they'll address it by some point this year, but that's really the most significant issue, aside from issues like school taxes, et cetera, et cetera. That is probably the most and biggest issue that we have to face in terms of equity.
Councillor Hanson, additional comments?
Well, I'll just say I do agree with the even distribution in this circumstance. I do look forward to the review. I suppose one other question, Rob, we've been hearing now for a number of years about the assessment appeals. Can you give us an update on those assessment appeals and how they're going to play into our review?
Worship, Councillor Hanson, the assessment appeals are ongoing. We are looking to take into account in our review the ability to structure a reserve that takes into account these appeals so that each and every year within our budget, we account for any of these particular losses that could happen moving forward. It's currently not an adjustment that's done in our budget, but because it is continuing and we feel that now might be the time through our property tax strategy refresh to really take a look at what we need to put into our budget to ensure these tax losses are dealt with when they happen, not a year later or 2 years later.
Yeah, I mean, my comments will be that I do agree with the even distribution. I do look forward to the review, and I particularly look forward to some resolution of this capped heavy industry situation, which has been around
Years,
for years, and
since the Liberals put it in place.
in terms of obvious inequities of taxation that could be obviously addressed, it strikes me as one that is a low-lying fruit of tax reform in my view. I also look forward to the assessment appeals, as Jamie said, the assessment appeals being completed so that there could be more context put over that class. That would be the non-capped heavy industry caps, and presumably that'll happen. I mean, my final comment would be, we're dealing with a balancing here, so I appreciate that option 2 does provide some relief, lowers the tax for non-capped, or for that's for light industry, but we're just shifting it over to residential, and I don't think now's the time to be shifting for the 7% tax increase. I don't think now is the time to be notifying our residents that we're shifting the taxation over to residential. So I'll leave it at that, except to say that I am looking forward to a review later.
For the review to be finished. When are we, can you give us the timeline on the review and the process and where we're at with it? I mean, we've been talking about this.
Elio has begun the review and he's already started it.
Yeah.
So he's gathering all of the facts, and we're in discussion with the other players with respect to the properties. So the fall is realistic for pulling together that information in my mind.
Mr. Stewart has some additional comments. Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, I would just say that the courts have dealt with a number of the fundamental issues which relate to the impact of pollution on these industrial properties. So we're actually quite confident that if we can deal with the differences in the way that the values are created under the act, that a lot of these appeals will quite fundamentally drop off the board. And then we can start to deal with some of the other structural issues associated with the taxation system.
Thank you. Councilor Mary?
Thank you. Jamie, thank you for your presentation, and I think it's really important to remember we're lucky to have industry. West Vancouver has no industry. The city and the district have the industry on the North Shore, and we're lucky to have it because they do contribute so much more and use so much less, as Jamie's presented to us this evening. We're not a level playing field. Industry is not a level playing field with their colleagues because of the capped and uncapped scenario that we've found ourselves in for years. But when we look across the region and we talk about the averages in all the classes, we're still not really a level playing field. I mean, West Vancouver is very different from us because they don't have industry. We don't have casinos, for instance. We pushed against that for many years because we took a moral stand on the impacts of gambling in our community, and we didn't want anything to do with it. But there are other municipalities that have it, and they derive, large amounts of revenue to it to offset their costs. We are geographically all different. To build in areas like Surrey is a lot different than building on the edge of a mountain, and the costs are different. And then when we look at, location, when you have 3 ski hills 20 minutes from your back door, there is a premium for that. As we go forward, I think we've shifted the tax rate off of business once. I think we shifted maybe twice. maybe twice we shifted it because small business was really being hit hard in a couple of years, like maybe 15 years ago or something. So we did shift onto the residential. Generally, we do the even. You know, I'm glad to hear that, you know, and Jamie's giving us the perspective of his company, where they live within their means when times are tough. They look back and where can we cut? Where can we make things more efficient? How can we make more revenue? And I think we really have to start fighting that bullet a lot harder than we have. It's hard politically to say no. But we really have to live within our means. And I think that we need to have a discussion much earlier in the year prior to the next budget discussion, because things are coming at us hard. And the cost that we're experiencing right now and the utility charges that Metro's throwing at us, they're only going to rise. They're only going to increase. And we're in such an uncertain time right now. You know, the big story is productivity in this country. You know, the interest rates, they're holding them right now. You know, sales of real estate have not increased. It's such a precarious time that we find ourselves in. And I think we've actually been saying that for a number of years. But, you know, taxes, I mean, these are big tax hikes compared to previous years. They're big. And so we really do need to have that discussion. And I think that we need to also, you know, how do we at the political level begin to put pressure on, you know, the provincial government to look at these impacts, because we don't want to lose companies like Allied. We don't want to lose those industrial employers who pay excellent wages for people to be able to remain here. That's been one of my, you know, reasons over the years to support them. That they are a company that can allow a family to live here, although I'm sure it's even challenging for them because of the, you know, Dr. Koss is talking about how much his house went up over 40 years. You know, I bought a house 9 years ago, it's tripled. 9 years. But that's crazy, right? So, yeah, it's the sustainability of money in our community are very challenging right now. And I implore us to look at everything, how it's connected, not in silos. And when we're giving direction to staff, when we're looking at redevelopment, when we're looking at our capital plan coming, that we're going to need to discuss. We need to get down to some details to really clearly understand what it's going to look like next year.
Comments, Councillor Murray? You know, I'm inclined to support in distribution. The option given to shift slightly out of light industrial, you know, I still see so much creep in light industrial from commercial. There's a lot of commercial activity that's taking place in light industrial, and it's causing more use of those spaces, more wear and tear of those spaces. They're generating revenue at a lower cost than their commercial competitors. And so I you know, I'm not convinced that that's the best way to address the inequities between commercial and light industrial, because generally the light industrial is getting a better deal on their costs. And so I think I'm going to be supporting even distribution. Yeah, I will be supporting even distribution. Where I would point out, I think a change in our approach and our policy is we're seeing more and more of the OTA, the other taxing authorities, getting higher and higher and higher. And I can tell you the pressure on the Metro side, the pressure from TransLink, the pressure from all of the OTA, it will soon pass the municipal portion of your bill. And so I think as an interim measure to properly reporting it back to our community, I'd like to hear staff's comments on breaking out the utility charge from Metro Vancouver and charging it as a separate charge in our community. Particularly as it's going to increase, to make sure that people understand that we're collecting it on their behalf, but it's being forced upon us to some degree from the region. And so I'm wondering how staff would like to start to move in that direction. I can also tell you that the provincial government is putting an incredible amount of pressure on TransLink to more heavily rely on property tax as a source of revenue for them, as the gas tax has been in decline now for 4 years as a source of revenue, and we're capped out at 18.5 cents per liter. That's capped out by legislation, and the parking tax is capped out, and the hydro tax is capped out. It means that TransLink has been cornered to the point where the only places they can get additional revenue for the growth is on fare box and property tax. And the province is heavily pressuring us to not increase the fare box, but to focus on the property tax. And so it just means that another agency is going to be heavily pushing increases towards that property tax number. And so again, I think we need to take strategies to more properly prepare our community and also make sure they understand that the source of those increases is not the District of North Vancouver necessarily. And so I'd be curious about your comments on that. I have initial comments from Mr. Stewart, and then come to you as well, Rick. Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, your worship, many other municipalities actually separate out the process so that the utility costs are done at a different time in the year. So it's much clearer. We can try to explain that in our brochures as we send the taxes out, and we plan to do that actually to make that much clearer. But another solution is to actually separate them completely so that the community knows that what they're paying for perhaps in January as opposed to in June or July is really reflects the cost we're paying for the outside taxation groups. The challenges, and Elio and Rick will tell you, is that quite often we don't get till April the estimates that we need from those other taxation authorities. So I don't want to be overly complex, and there are some solutions, but it's difficult to make that kind of a change. It might take a couple of years to do that. So thank you.
I'm familiar with Burnaby does their utility charge in January to separate it out. I don't know that we want to necessarily do that. I think the billing could be at the same time, and therefore you have the roll and everything from or how it's going to be the rates from Metro at the time. But at the same time, their rates are going up and up and up faster than ours. And what was it reflected in here? 10%, I think, is what's reflected in here. And what is the ballpark plan? I know is 11, 5, 5, and 5 is sort of the ballpark financial plan for Metro going forward. But again, there's no guarantees that those outer years won't be higher, and with the cost overruns they've had, I suspect they will be. And so you want us to explore ways to either better communicate it or break it out as two separate charges. Yeah, Rick.
So for now, and included in tonight's presentation, we have started to break out the utility charges so you can clearly see what the municipal charges are versus the Metro Vancouver charges. And you're right, it was showing in the slide at plus 10% for Metro Vancouver and plus 4% for the municipal charges. We are working with the communications department to redesign the tax newsletter. It'll now be the tax and utility newsletter, and it'll clearly separate those charges and have some areas explaining exactly what's changing for this year and what's anticipated to come with the information that we know. So that is in the works. In terms of separating the bill, I think Elio and I need to take a look at some of the options about what's technically possible. Probably not in the near term, but it's something that we could explore in the long term, including in next year.
But Mr. Stewart, additional comments? No?
Yeah, I'm sorry to continue to intervene here, but the fact of the matter is that as we head into 2025 and 2026, we know that the metro costs are going to increase quite dramatically as a result of the treatment plant. And so we're going to have to pressure Metro to reduce their capital projects, and we are going to have to do the same in order to balance this and not result in a situation where our taxpayers are paying an incredibly expensive increase in costs. And so I just want to let council know that staff is really aware of that. And we're going to start that process in terms of finding ways to reduce the impact of utilities on North Vancouver taxpayers.
Thank you. And it may also be good to add in the documentation there that there is no people, when they pay the school tax, have an assumption that it's going to go to schools in our community. And there is no direct relationship between the amount that we contribute in school tax to the actual money being returned to our community to maintain our schools. In fact, the urban and rural split within the school tax is incredibly unfair, where you have the urban communities heavily subsidizing the capital works within the school system outside. And it doesn't reflect the amount of money coming out of your community. It's going to go back into your community. And I think that that's unfair. And I'd like to see those issues better communicated in our materials as well. But you can definitely see a situation where between TransLink, Metro Vancouver utilities, and the main, both the main billing and also the sewerage sub-area changes that we're going to have in the community, that portion of the tax bill could easily eclipse what we contribute for parks and fire and police and roads and all of the other pieces that we have will be passed by these other organizations. This isn't a pick on Metro Vancouver, to be clear. Metro Vancouver, when you look at the current sewerage sub area, $421 or $427 for an average house in North Vancouver, and you think, you know, what is it worth to me to flush my toilet every day all year round? $427 is a pretty screaming deal. It's good value for the money. When you break out how much water you get for the money you contribute on the water side, again, it's a fraction of what you would pay if you commercially went out and had to buy water for your house. So there is good value in working together as a region to be able to pay for these things and offer them to our communities. The challenge is the cost to come up to the modern standards is just going up so fast. And I think it's going to really shock our community when it hits their tax bill. But other than that, I'd say working together with the region has had a lot of positive benefits, but we're kind of at a precipice where we've had to update. Nobody would normally update 4 wastewater treatment plants at the same time. And yet the legislation that we've had to comply with has done exactly that, and it's causing our utility charges to go through the roof. So anyway, thank you very much for the additional information. Councillor Forbes.
Councillor Ma, I think.
Councillor Forbes, Councillor Ma, and Councillor Murray. There you go. Councillor Forbes, go ahead.
I will take it. Just a clarification, and there, when we're talking about breaking it out, are we talking about breaking it out in the newsletter, the taxation newsletter? Because I would also like to see that we emphasize the difference of what actually stays in the district and what doesn't. So I'd like to see our tax bill look different as well, because some people don't read the newsletter, they just look at the bill.
Mm.
So I would really like to see if we can make some changes in our actual tax bill and break out all the costs that don't stay within the district, or the district is in charge separate from separate.
Through the mayor, we can take a look at that. There's obviously, we've done some studies like that in the past, for example, when it comes to TransLink costs, where the revenues come from and where they get spent. So it can get complicated, but we can absolutely look at school taxes. We know what that looks like. There are some that are a little bit more complicated, but that's always a question, isn't it?
Yeah. But if we can look at it through the eyes that a lot of people may not read the newsletter, So let's try to make the actual tax bill reflect that. And I know you do that all the time, but I just wanted to clarify that. And just the one other thing going through all just the even distribution, I'm in favor of as well, so that would be my recommendation. Anything else I was gonna say, it's been said.
Councilors Mom, Yuri, and back. Go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you. I agree with Councilor Hanson's earlier point that shifting taxes, regardless of how small to residential, is not something we want to consider right now, given the 7% tax increase in the pending situation with the wastewater treatment plant. As Elio mentioned, the new provincial housing legislation will maybe impact residential property assessments relative to other classes. We just don't know how yet. But I also feel that it could affect properties within the residential class. If we refer to the map provided by the district at recent public information sessions, if BC assessment were to increase the assessed value of lots where services is likely feasible, the green areas, versus lots where services are likely challenging, the blue areas, that could potentially have unintended consequences of this kind of shifting assessments within that class. Any comments on that? Is that something that's possible, or?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we're seeing out there right now, where there's development potential and properties trade, assessment values follow and they get revised. So that's a natural progression that will occur depending on what happens with the new legislation that's approved through this council and before the end of June to comply with the housing legislation. BC assessment will be out there and they'll be aware of the situation, and the sales will be limited, but they'll be taking that into account for the next assessment roll. It probably will take some time to make its way through though.
Well, generally speaking, they look at comparables in terms of sales, but we've also identified certain parts of the district that this new development can take, or more likely, or less challenging. Is that a shift if BC assessment were to consider that?
Well, historically, the way we've looked at development potential, when you rezone property, we've recognized that that's led to an improved value, and we have been setting that aside to manage growth. This is like looking at the whole of the district and applying the same thing and allowing more density. So there's a couple of ways you could look at it. You could treat it like you do now, or if you just hold everything constant, one side's going to go up and one side's going to go down, and the total amount will stay the same. So that's why we have to bring back the property values and assessments and have further discussions about how you'd like to handle it. But the likely outcome, if you look at Vancouver, is single family values will go up or pay a little bit more, and multifamily values would pay a little bit less. And you can see that when you look at when they've introduced new ways of building housing on single family lots, you can see this shift where single family homes pay more and multifamily homes pay less.
It's never been this widespread before.
Yeah, just to finish off, there's a lot of comments about, us watching our expenses, and, we brought this up when the initial tax increase came to council, and I agree, we need to watch our expenses. There's a lot of competing demands that we have. There's a lot of things that we want to do in this district to make sure that it's a great place to live, but I think we really need to watch our expenses next year. At the same time, we need to have policies that support local business and local industry, but all things considered, at this point, I'm going to support a even distribution.
Mr. Stewart, did you have additional comments?
Yeah, our previous CFO always used the comment that when the tide goes up, if everybody goes up, then there's not a material difference. The challenge that we have here is that with the provincial legislation, there's a chance here that some properties will go up and others won't, based on the policy shifts that the province is suggesting. So that's what we're really gonna have to work on, and I know council has some very difficult discussions ahead of them in terms of how we apply this, and there's a number of options with respect to how we apply it, and I'm looking forward to those discussions, being mindful of the impact on the various different areas in the district. When I was a CAO in West Vancouver back a number of years ago, the BC assessment used to do a review neighborhood by neighborhood, which resulted in one neighborhood getting a huge bump compared to everybody else, which upset them, of course, and then they just rotated that round until everybody was upset. So, I mean, the problem is with the BC assessment system, it's really broken, quite frankly. But I think council's approach, from what I'm hearing from a majority, is now is not the time to necessarily tinker, but we're going to have to be doing that in the future, reflecting the changes that are happening.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Councillor
Councillor Back.
Back hasn't spoken
Yeah.
yet, so Councillor Back, followed by Councillor Mary, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Little. So generally speaking, I agree with the comments that have been made around the table, and I do support the staff recommendation for an even distribution. I'm always concerned about businesses, and particularly small businesses, and what their the effect of triple net leases and how these tax increases just affect some of these businesses that are already struggling in many cases. But I'm glad to hear that there is some relief coming from the province in different ways. I wonder if either of you could provide a bit more of a comment around the Bill 28 and the relief that might provide, because I know the highest and best use tax issue has been one that we've certainly heard about in recent years. And do we think that this is going to provide the relief that it's intended?
Through your worship, Councillor Back, through studying the legislation, we found that the particular tools in that legislation are really tools that will impact a tax payable for a business in the year when the increase actually happens. We find that over time, you find that the actual assessment goes back down to the average. Taxes do come back down. Right. So it's a tool that we're going to monitor each and every year. And if there is areas in the district that undergo new development, it is in those years that we'll come back to council and inform that potentially a permissive tax exemption should be applied to some of those businesses.
Got it. So in a particular town center, for example, if we see a spike one year, yeah, we could talk about how we could use that tool.
Correct. It's really a tool that's used in development areas. It is not really to smooth market-based assessment values that increase because of the market. It's really looking at those areas that someone is developing or intends to develop, and a business is caught in the middle.
Right. One property sale could make a big difference. Yeah,
correct.
It's quite possible that new housing legislation will spill over and have some impact here as well on business. So we'll be monitoring.
Yeah, so I do appreciate the approach. I support the approach that is being recommended. I agree with the comments around separating out and making it very clear in all our communications what portion of the tax bill is coming from other taxing authorities, particularly as we see these Metro Vancouver projects coming that we know are going to cause major increases for people. I do agree with all the comments that have been made around that. In terms of keeping a close watch on our spending in the coming years, I certainly agree with that. Although I think we've made some important investments that are about along the lines of what Councillor Ma has said, making sure that businesses can continue to thrive in our community, making sure that people can get around our community in ways other than the car, and make the list goes on. So it is always about balancing priorities, and I think we've made some important investments, but we are going to keep a close eye on that going forward. So I do support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Back. Councillor Murray.
I can't help but think back to when we did fully blanket zoned Marine Drive, and the unintended consequence of that was the Tomahawk restaurants taxes going up by about 400% because they got caught up in that, that rezoning that changed the class and it impacted them, and we reacted to that and helped solve that problem, but it'll be interesting to see what the unintended consequences will be with this legislation. And, you know, we're talking about this legislation is, you know, it's the point of all of it is to try to create more housing, not necessarily affordable housing, which I think was a loss. Not focusing on that, but as assessments rise, so do the values and the costs. And, you know, they had a story on the news tonight. There's 33,000 construction starts right now. The news is kind of questioning the numbers that, you know, there is quite a lot going on out there. We've been building for a number of years and nothing has come down, which begs the question, if ultimately the numbers, the supply and demand does shift the numbers down, by how much? You know, that's a question that never gets asked. Like, will it go down? Sure, but there's a difference between 2% and 20%. Is it worth 2%? You know, the extra cost to be able to accommodate the increase in population, is it worth that 2%? So on the tax bill, when we changed it years ago, because we did change it, it used to be sort of a lump sum number. And then we changed it when Nicole was our CFO, Nicole DeVoe. And we pulled out Metro, we pulled out school taxes, we pulled out all the stuff that wasn't us. And we did different colors on the tax bill so people could see the shift. Council did play a role in that. And I would like to request that whatever finance is coming up with communication, that you bring it back to council before it goes out. I'd like to see it too. I think that I just want to be able to see what it's going to look like, what we're sending out to our community. I agree with Betty that a lot of people are just going to grab that bill, especially this year. They're just going to look at that bottom number, right? They're going to look at the bill. They may not go through the newsletter as much as communications might think they will. So I think council needs to have a little bit of a blush at what you guys are thinking and what it looks like. I would also ask, how long would it take to completely remove Metro from our tax bill and have it separately sent out like Burnaby? Like, what are we talking? Like, could we start it this year and change it for next year?
Through your worship, Councilor Murray, we can do an analysis of removing the utility fees from our tax bill and look towards collecting it like other municipalities in early spring. It is an option. We could study that and bring it back to council.
So like for Burnaby, for instance, my girlfriend, she was an example. She bought a rental unit in Burnaby and calculated what the rent was, but didn't realize the utility was separate and coming from Metro. So do we put Metro on notice to say we want them to send our residents, like we have to activate it with them, or we activate it?
I think Burnaby still collects it, they just do it separately, is that not correct?
They get a separate bill from Metro, their residents get a separate bill.
I'm not sure about that. I don't think so.
That is through the municipality of Burnaby, and it is the municipal utility fees that are being collected in the month of March.
But it's not on the same tax bill that they get for municipal taxes. It's two different bills.
Two separate bills.
Yeah.
Metro
That's what I
issues
mean.
us.
That's what I mean. So it's two separate bills. So how long would it take for us to have two separate bills?
Well, right now, we're how many weeks? We're weeks away.
I
right? So
understand.
it's for
For next year, but we could implement it so it's set up for next year.
I
can look at
want to
that.
be clear about something that Elio just said. So you said that Burnaby's separate utility charge is the municipal utility charge, or is it the
No, it's
Metro
Metro's.
Vancouver's utility charge?
I believe it's both.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
so they not only have a Metro charge in at that separate time of year, they move their municipal utilities, the local pipes, into that bill as well.
Collecting utility fees earlier in the year,
Both utility.
and then their tax portion is coming in the month of May.
Okay, Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, so worship, that's something we could do for next year. That's not, no, we can't do it for this year.
Oh,
The challenge is that we don't get the school tax numbers, for example, and we don't get the Metro numbers early in the year. So they're an estimate. So as long as those estimates are relatively consistent, we're okay. The challenge is always if, in fact, at the end of the day, for a variety of reasons, the metro policies shift, and all of a sudden you find yourself levying a bill in January that doesn't reflect the actual shift in costs. Anyway, this is nothing for council to worry about. I'm just being very practical about the fact that we could find ourselves in a situation because Metro has traditionally been very stable with respect to their application of their rates, but that's shifting. So this is a little more difficult time to be making the shift, but we can still do it. No question about it.
First time speaker, Councillor Pope, followed by Councillor Forbes. Councillor Pope.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for bringing forward the mention of government spending needs to be looked at. I couldn't agree more. And I think most taxpayers that are now facing this astronomical wastewater treatment plant bill would agree. There needs to be greater government accountability at Metro. And we are now looking at $725 a year for the next 30 years for homeowners on their tax bill, on their utility bill on the North Shore. Definitely, I think it should be separated, but it's still going to be there. This horrendous amount is one of the biggest problems facing North Shore homeowners in terms of municipal services, and everything else is going to come into question if we don't get this sorted out. And I would like to see taxpayers standing up more and demanding government accountability. And that is exactly what needs to be done with Metro and with the wastewater treatment plant. And I think that it's one big mess. And I'm glad that people are starting to realize that this was driven by Metro and not the district. But I think there's still a huge amount of misunderstanding about the difference between Metro Vancouver and its services and what people pay to get their services from Metro and the utilities, and what the district tax bill is all about. So yeah, I think it should be broken down as much as possible. And then taxpayers can start demanding accountability from Metro Vancouver. And those are my comments for now.
Not to add to your frustration with the situation, but that 725, that only reflects the uplift in the budget. It doesn't even reflect the original budget, which is an impact of about how much per household that is already on the route. On top of that,
we were already looking at a $400 increase over the next 5 years. It was a little bit more than that actually, plus the 725. And there are additional costs that have not been confirmed as well.
Yeah, well, all of this needs to be transparent, and the taxpayers need to understand what on earth has gone wrong at Metro Vancouver.
Much. That's Forbes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But my understanding is that the increase, that major increase we're talking about, 725, is not going to affect taxes till next year.
That's right.
So what we're talking about is this year. So I agree. So we need to deal with this year, and we need to decide how we're recommending and moving this forward. But my concern is when we talk about we're going to look at things in the fall, I'm concerned how fast we can start looking at things because of what's going on with Metro. Now that we have the new assessments, I don't know how far along or how far you go in your analysis, but I would like council to be involved as soon as possible, because we need to we need to look into what's going on, because next year, if we think this year was bad and residents didn't like 7% from just us, the municipality, next year, they're gonna be lighting councilors' houses on fire. I mean, it needs to be looked at ASAP. And so I would wholeheartedly recommend that you bring information to us as soon as you can, and we start looking at it sooner than the fall. We can start looking at it before the break, so that we can mull it over August when we're on our break, and then continue on in the fall, because otherwise then we get into our own capital budget funding, which we have all said we need to look at our costs and how we can reduce that. So I don't want all of that going at the same time. So I really hope that you can bring us some information going forward sooner.
Mr. Mayor and Councillor Forbes, we are planning on amending the budget towards the end of May, and there will be opportunities to have further discussions on the budget prior to the summer break, definitely before the fall. The fall update that we're talking about tonight is following the analysis that LAO's team is doing on the property tax strategy. So we have the results from that to provide to council in the fall.
But that fall impact with the assessments, will you be covering what Metro is predicting is going to happen?
We hope to do that much earlier than that. We need to,
Yeah.
we hope to have that information in the spring.
I would also like to see us as a council have a workshop conversation about as much as we can find out openly, because a lot of this council doesn't even know what's going on. We're the same as the public. We don't actually have much more information than the public. So I would really like to see some sort of workshop for councillors to be able to get in as much information as they can, public, and for the public to be able to come and ask questions that we may be able to answer. There's so much going around out there. We don't know what's true and what's not true. And so it's kind of, it needs to be dealt with. And it needs to be discussed and brought out as much as we can bring it out with as much information.
Councillor Forbes, any additional comments? Consensus form around even distribution. Would you like that in a motion? Okay, and
Even
so-
though we don't really do motions at workshops.
I know, this is-
Yeah, we keep saying that, but we keep doing it.
At the discretion of the
You
chair.
hate it. Like, you know, now you're just,
This one's different. This is different.
well,
We
it's
don't
not
want-
really.
We want them to not have to prepare 4 different bylaws or anything when it comes to it. We want them to prepare the bylaw in line with even distribution. Mr. Stewart, do you have additional comments?
Your worship, there's a difference between a binding motion, which council makes in a regular council meeting. And there's a motion which you can do in workshops, which tells us what direction you want to go in, so we can prepare bylaws. So I want to make that distinction. I mean, it's not that you're creating a binding motion legally. What you're doing is you're giving us direction to create the necessary bylaws, which you can put on a regular council agenda and get approved. So I think we need to move past this discussion around whether we do motions or don't do motions. What's necessary is signaling council direction in a workshop, which is absolutely necessary in order for us to prepare bylaws.
But we don't do surprise motions, but the expectation of this meeting was that we would be giving direction on this issue. So I'm happy to move a motion that staff are directed to prepare the budget bylaw in line with option 1, which is even distribution. Seconded by Councillor Back. Prepared to call the question on the matter. All in favor? Contrary minded, motion carries. Any additional updates or anything like that from staff? Okay, all right. Thank you all very much for participating in the meeting. Have yourselves a great evening. A great week. Good night.